Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see so many happy faces. This morning we have Pattie Collins speaking to us about her story, which is quite extraordinary. Amongst other things, she's a member of BAFTA and the Jewish Film Festival committee. And I think she might get the medal as the most loyal My Story watcher on a Sunday morning. There may be other contestants, but I think she's one of up there, definitely. Over to you, Pattie.
Thanks. Well, thank you. Thanks, Gillian, and thanks, Lawrence, for this chance to look back over my slightly multifarious career. I've had quite a few experiences. Even when I applied to be an assistant producer at the BBC in 1982, the personnel officer looked at me and said, you know, we like to breastfeed and wean our applicants and our producers. We like to take them at 22. You're already 33. You've had 3 jobs already. Why on earth should we hire you? So I think maybe I did get the job because I said that all I'd ever done had been about people, trying to understand their lives from their point of view and then trying to tell their story or share their story. And I think that's quite a BBC thing to do. Anyway, before I go into careers, I'd like to tell you a bit about my own background. My father, Bernard, who was always called Bert, was an only child. He was born in Blackpool in 1914 to a poor family of Russian and Romanian origin. There were only 4 Jewish families in Blackpool at the time, so as soon as he could, he moved to Manchester and he became apprenticed to a pharmacist. He didn't have money for college and he studied at night. He managed to set up his own small pharmacy, Langton's chemist John Dalton Street, which any Mancunian might remember. But his experiences during the Depression in the 1930s, he was a door-to-door salesman at one time. He saw a lot of poverty. It led him to devote his life really to socialist politics as a Labour councillor. Dad was on many committees. In those days, the local council was responsible for every aspect of the city, from health to education, sewage, you name it. He was very respected. In 1965, he became the youngest Lord Mayor of Manchester. So there he is, being Lord Mayor. And he was one of the first people to go on an official tour of Russia. He got the nickname Toilet Langton amongst the delegates because wherever they went, he asked to go. But the reason was that the Foreign Office had asked him to find out what went on behind the glitz of the show houses and the buildings. And he found that actually there was a lot of squalor and a lot of poverty. Later on, he was on the First Race Relations Board and he was awarded a CBE for his work with the police. My father's motto was, leave the world in a better place than when you arrived. And indeed, he did do that. He died young of his 4th heart attack when he was 67. My mother also died relatively young at 68 of motor neuron disease. She was born in Dublin. Her father, Jack Sirotto, was from a Russian musical rabbinic family. He'd gone to Dublin also to train as a pharmacist, and he married Molly Bacholta there. She was a 3rd generation Jewish Dubliner. They moved to Salford, near Manchester, with their newborn baby, Betty, who was my mother. My parents met through amateur dramatics in a play called Dangerous Corner. And I don't know if you can see this, but this was them in amateur dramatics. My father's on your right or left with a police hat here, and that's my mother with a hat next to him. Dangerous Corner was always a joke at home, given that that's where they met. So my mother, there's my mother as Lady Mayoress. She was an intelligent woman. She had a good sense of humour. She was generous, and she made a very admired Lady Mayoress to my father's Lord Mayor. During that time, we all lived in the huge Gothic Manchester Town Hall. Now, I remember coming home and rushing past suits of armour and marble statues in fear before getting into the mayoral department. But I did have a chance to meet some interesting people, including Prince Philip, who stayed overnight and I bumped into him in the corridor. I was only 17, I was a teenager, but he treated me like an adult and talked about life, and I've never forgotten that. Sadly, my parents' marriage didn't survive this exotic experience. It was so different from their normal life, followed as it was by a return to selling toothpaste over the counter in the chemist shop. Now, career number one, probation officer in Hackney. I think the defining character of my 4 careers was chance. I think that's in the blurb. After my degree in sociology and psychology at Liverpool University, I was at home wondering what to do next when the phone rang. And it was one of the Liverpool tutors offering me a place on the probation course to train as a probation officer. Well, I'd actually trailed a probation officer as an undergraduate, and I found it really fascinating. So I said, yes, I'll train. It was a form of social work in those days, and I learned to ask, how do you feel about that? And what can I do to help? And a few months later, when I was working in London, I visited a woman whose husband was about to come out of prison, and her 4th child was not his. And I said, how do you feel about that? She said, how do you expletive think I feel? Now, how are you going to get me some more money? Well, expletives didn't bother me much by then. I spent 6 months training in Liverpool's Toxteth area, and some of you may remember the Toxteth riots. The Toxteth was a poor community, tight-knit, full of tough characters with tough youngsters who frequently came up against the law. I learned a lot about probation work, but much more I learned how to swear like a trooper. Quite liberating for a middle-class Jewish girl, but pretty awful for my parents. Like most youngsters in the 60s and 70s, I thought London was paved with gold. So I couldn't wait to get there. The London Probation Service used us as cannon fodder, putting us in the most difficult areas where anyone who knew London wouldn't dare to go. I ended up in Hackney, which is nothing like the Hackney of today. Mare Street was a line of big, anonymous blocks of council flats. There's no tube in that area, meaning people were cut off. And people tended to put their most difficult tenants there, ex-prisoners, the unemployed, single parents with large families, Hells Angels gangs. I was only 22 with almost no life experience. I think my naive innocence must have protected me in the dark nights when I trekked through six-story blocks of council flats to visit an ex-con or a juvenile delinquent or a young offender. I was never accosted. I had 60 people on my caseload. The UK average was 20 at the time. There were young offenders, adult offenders, prisoners and their wives, ex-prisoners, and I wrote 2 to 3 court reports a week on juveniles and adults on remand, trying to get the magistrate to understand more about their circumstances and maybe hopefully mitigate their sentence. We had a stipendiary magistrate in the Oak Street court where we mostly had our work. We nicknamed him Mad Mick McGelliot. He was always drunk and always abusive, and he once said to a cowering teenage boy, yes, "The worst of the beasts of the field is a jackal, and you are the jackal here." And he was always sending people to Borstal. Well, I've tried to remember an interesting case, but the truth of the matter is, all I can see in my mind's eye are impoverished men and women and angry or frightened boys and girls. I've been trained in social work, a caring approach to working with people, and to see all this inescapable poverty, people returning to the same environment from prison or Borstal, no prospects, no hopes. It really sapped my soul. We were just papering over the cracks of society. Nothing was going to change, and after 3 years, I decided to leave. I went to say goodbye to Vivian, my young Hells Angel mother I'd supervised for 2 years. She'd been pregnant when we met, and I'd helped her to get married to her Hells Angel boyfriend in Borstal and helped her find a flat to claim benefits. I felt really guilty leaving her. "Well, Pat," she said, I was Pat in those days, "you've come a long way since I first knew you. You were naive and ignorant when you started, but you've learned a lot since then. Now, who's taking over from you?" So much for my feeling indispensable. This young woman was hardened to loss. She's lost her father, her mother took her own life, and now her husband was in Borstal. Career number 2, a social anthropologist in Sri Lanka and South Sudan. I took a few months after this, travelling in Europe. I spent time as a researcher on cannabis-using groups in Notting Hill under David, now Lord Treesman, while I looked for my next life chapter. That's 2 of the 3 jobs I'd had when I applied for the BBC. I'd been offered a place to become a barrister and another to do a master's in criminology, but chance intervened again. I was in Manchester at a wedding of a friend, and I met an Oxford Don. I told him about what was going on for me, and he said, "You should be in Oxford. Send me your CV." So I did. And this led to an interview for the diploma in social anthropology. It felt like coming home. I'd found my real vocation, looking at lives of others from their point of view. And for the next 9 years, I lived in Oxford doing research and teaching. Can you all see me? Good, okay. I can't. My first piece of anthropological research was in Sri Lanka in 1975 for a thesis researching race relations. I got off the plane at Colombo Airport, put my rucksack on my back and was aiming to go to the youth hostel. A man approached and said, "The youth hostel's full, but I can take you to a very nice, cheap hotel." So off I went with him. He took me to the Omar Khayyam Hotel, where he left me with the manager, Pat, and her assistant, Jacinta. And there's a picture of Pat and Jacinta. Can you see that? So we chatted into the night. I noticed that many so-called honeymoon couples were there for just one night and realised I found myself in an upmarket brothel. The following day, Pat told me that the man had come to collect his sexual payment from me, but she'd recognised my innocence and forced him to leave. From then on, I used the Omar Khayyam as my base for the rest of my stay. I was fascinated by David Rose's account of his life in Sri Lanka in the present day, and amazed how different it is from when I was there in 1975, when there were no high-rise buildings and hardly any white or non-Ceylonese people. The Prime Minister, Mrs. Bandaranaike, wanted to develop the country from the bottom up. There are also many Tamils in top jobs in the capital, Colombo. I spent 5 months in Sri Lanka, traveling all over the country to the north of the island, full of lovely Hindu temples. That's where the high caste Hindu Tamil-speaking people live. And around the south of the island, which is about 2/3 of the whole island, are mainly Buddhist and the ethnic groups called the Sinhalese. I came to understand the legacy of anger and resentment, causing trouble brewing between the Hindus and Tamils and the Buddhist Sinhalese. Both groups claim to have arrived on the island 2,000 years ago, but a deep jungle separated them. And they never met. The British colonised the island in 1795, and they tore down the jungle between the Tamil and Sinhalese. They made English the common language, although Tamil and Sinhalese were recognised as official languages. And strangely, for such a tiny island, there are 2 monsoons. The north has a small amount of rain, very dry, and the south has a really heavy monsoon and can grow food abundantly all the year round. So the British saw the Tamils living in relative poverty and saw an opportunity to divide and rule. They offered education to the Tamils, and many Tamils moved south where they had positions in government, civil service, and the professions. The majority of Sinhalese in their lush surroundings didn't really opt on the whole for education at that time. But by 1975, when I visited, many Tamils were living in the capital, Colombo, and in the south. I met people from both groups, Tamil and Sinhalese, who were friends with each other. But I realised even then that the Sinhalese were becoming jealous of the prominence of the Tamils. They were egged on by the powerful and politicised Sinhalese Buddhist monks. The government began to discriminate against the Tamils, ending Tamil as an official language, or as an equal official language, and curtailing their rights. And this led to the civil war we all know about. The Sinhalese won, and now the Tamils are second-class citizens, and that's a very sad story. Anyway, more happy thing, this is me in a sari. I often stayed with very nice Buddhist or Hindu families, and they would deck me out in these lovely saris just to have a go at it. Well, I was in Oxford. My supervisor was called Schuyler Jones, which was very aptly named because he was an Indiana Jones type adventurer photographer in Afghanistan before somehow falling into the role of professor of social anthropology or ethnology in Oxford. One day he approached me and said he'd like to put me forward to join an expedition to the Southern Sudan to take photos and collect artifacts for the Pitt Rivers Museum in Anthropology in Oxford. In fact, our department was part of the museum. The 4-month expedition was funded by the Royal Geographical Society and run by the British Institute in Eastern Africa in Nairobi. There'd be archaeologists and geologists on the trip, one other anthropologist and one other woman. When I protested I knew nothing about Sudan or collecting, he replied, "You can mug all that up, but there'll be a number of very difficult people on the trip, and it'll be a very difficult, hard journey. I think you'll be an easy person for them to get on with," which was quite a compliment when I think about it. We went in 3 Land Rovers from Nairobi through Kenya, entering South Sudan from the southeast. There were 2 Kenyan drivers, Ben and Emmanuel, and we all took turns driving. We drove past Lake Nakuru with its pink flamingos, and past Lake Turkana in Kenya, and we camped along the way. And I think this is the moment when I'm going to have a go at sharing the screen. So here we go, share screen. Put that on there. No, it's not gone on. Help. Lawrence.
Lawrence, is there anything you can do?
Lawrence, I'm putting my share screen on the whiteboard. It's not going on.
No, it shouldn't be on the whiteboard, Pattie.
Oh, it shouldn't be on it. So
no,
no,
just be on the
just stick it on.
On the screen on the left-hand side of your screen.
Oh.
It should be highlighted blue.
Or green.
No.
Or green, Pattie?
No, I've got the blue thing saying whiteboard.
No, you don't want whiteboard.
No, I know. You want anything else.
You need to come out and do it again. And then I think on the bottom right-hand side of your screen will be choose. And that's what you need to press to go into.
Oh, I see. So I go back to screen share.
Yes.
Yeah, let's go and share.
There you go.
Yes.
And now I bring it in.
Are you on whiteboard? You're on whiteboard.
You're on whiteboard.
Oh, so where do I put it?
You need to come out. Remember we did it the other day. And
I know, I've done it twice very easily. Here we go. It didn't look like the same when I did it. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Press share.
No, but you're clicked onto whiteboard. You need to come out of whiteboard, Pattie. You need to go. Is it offering you options when you go to share screen?
It just says whiteboard. It just says whiteboard.
What happens when you click on whiteboard, Pattie?
Nothing.
I'll
try share again and then see select. No.
You're selecting the whiteboard which is highlighted. You need to come off the highlighted whiteboard and highlight another choice, which will be your.
Just a minute. Oh no. Looks to be a shame, really. Anyway, if I can't. I'm now on. I'm on a white screen with whiteboard in a little blue square.
Right, you need to move that highlighted blue square across to. It'll say desktop. It should say desktop.
No, it doesn't want to move.
Pattie, can you minimize your screen? And can you find a document? Can you find the document in your documents file?
Minimize the screen. Yeah.
Minimize the screen, and then on the right-hand side of your screen, you've got documents where you originally typed this document or have this document saved.
Yes.
Yes, can you locate that?
Yes.
Have you got it?
Yeah. Shall I pull it up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you opened it?
It's open now. Sorry about this, people. Right, I've got it.
Is it open?
Yeah.
Now click share screen.
I just have to pull it. Let me get rid of it. After the, now
Get rid of, keep the document open.
Yes.
And now go to the top of, or wherever your share screen option is, either the top of your screen or the bottom. Green share screen, and click it.
Just a minute. No, I haven't got. I don't have it.
Have you got the option to share screen?
I haven't got my Zoom up now. Let's just get the Zoom back up.
Click onto the Zoom icon.
Click on, I'm just clicking on it, and it's also not working for me. Oh, there we go. Back to meeting. Okay, I'm back in the meeting now. What do I do? Share screen.
Share screen.
Yeah. Then.
Now that document should come up. The document is open, is it?
Yeah.
Press share screen.
Yeah, I've got share screen. It says offering me video content from second camera. Your machine doesn't. It says your machine does not support virtual background without a green share. I think I'm just going to have to do it without, and I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Lawrence.
Yes. It's frozen.
Just a minute. Gosh. So, sorry, Pattie, just once again, you've got your document open.
Yeah.
And everything else, the whiteboard is shut. There's no option for whiteboard. The document is open.
Yeah.
So where is the share screen option on your computer screen?
It's at the bottom in a little green diddle.
Yes. Could you press that?
Yeah.
What is it showing you now?
It's showing me slides as virtual background.
Anything else?
Music or computer sound only, video, content from second camera.
Is there a basic and advanced choice for you?
That's advanced. The basic one is, oh yes, here we are. Here's
yes.
my book. You think I can put it up there?
Basic you need.
Yeah.
Is the document there?
There's documents there.
Please click on share screen.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Oh, that document should come up.
No.
So the document is, yeah, thank you.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, something's come up.
Yes. Now just, it's to the side. What do we get? Yeah, thank you. You've done it.
No, yes, but I don't want the document. I want my photos.
Okay, just a moment. Hang on a second. Before you take it out, see if the photos are anywhere by scrolling down.
I doubt it. No.
Okay. So come out of this, close this.
But Pattie, I think you had your photos in a PowerPoint.
I did.
Yes. So you need to bring the PowerPoint up. That's the what you need to do.
Right. Here's my PowerPoint. Now what do I do with it?
Click it to open it.
Yes.
And then screen share. We did this a couple of times on.
Aha. Yay.
Yes.
There you go. Didn't realize it was on a PowerPoint.
Well done.
Well done.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Yes. Sorry, everybody, got it now.
That's a classic example of Southampton community coming together.
Brilliant.
Okay, great. So there we are. You can see a rather mucky campsite of us with our 3 tents and 3 Land Rovers. And this is one of the better roads. Now, I'm not sure where I was up to. So we went in 3 Land Rovers through Kenya. After 3 days driving north, the terrain became harder. This is a good road, empty sand desert, and we rarely saw people, maybe an occasional man with a spear. And once we arrived in Sudan, it became a tougher journey. There'd been no development during the Anglo-Egyptian colonial time. There were hardly any roads left, and they'd become rutted rocks and unshaven sand. And then after independence in 1955, the traditional African Southern South had been mired in civil war with the Muslim Arab North, who wanted to introduce the Arab language and Sharia law. The interesting thing for us as anthropologists was that the lack of infrastructure had enabled the separate 60 ethnic groups in the South to mostly retain their own individual languages, regions, cultural practices and territory. And we stayed with 3 groups: the settled Moro in the west, the cattle herding Dinka in the north, and the semi-settled Laram in the southeast. So I'll just pop back here. This gives you 2 pieces of information. One is that this is the place where we were. This is South Sudan, and it's quite a big country. The north is, and the Arab bit is in the north, although Darfur and other parts and the Nuba are actually in the north part. And then this is the south part, which is all African and relates to the Africans in Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya. So they're not Arab at all. This is I'll talk about later, but you can see that the photographs I took and the documentation is actually online at the Pitt Rivers Museum. So I have to say that this became the most fascinating period of my life. It was actually an idyllic life there in 1979. Idyllic because I was invited to stay in a village by a young teacher from the Laram people, Peter Longole. The Laram live in between the towns of Kapreta and Torit in the southeast of South Sudan, not far from the Ethiopian and Kenyan border. The northern Laram live 25 kilometers north of the main road, reached via a dirt track, and they live at the base of the beautiful Boya Hills in stockaded villages. And Peter took me to stay in one of these villages with his aunt Nakine and her daughter, with her aunt Nakam and her daughter Nakine. And here's a picture of them. That's Peter Longole on the left, and that's his aunt Nakam, wearing a kikoi that I'd given her from Kenya. So Peter and I spent the next 3 to 4 weeks collecting histories and cultural information and traveling around the area, while I slept on a mud hut on a cowskin. So there I am, just to prove that I was there. Well, I decided to go back in 1980 with my rucksack for an extended research trip. I wanted to understand their language and culture. It had been like living in the Bible. They were cattle owners, they were polygamous, women tended the fields, cooked, brought up the children, while men took the cattle to watering camps. They had one god, Tamutitin, Tamu meaning rain, and the rains in 1979 had been really good, the harvest overflowing and the people welcoming. The Laram also reminded me of the Israelis in the 50s and 60s. I'd been brought up by the idea of about 3 million Jews surrounded by 50 million Arabs at war with them, and I could see the parallels with this small Laram minority surrounded by the vast Xhosa tribe with whom they competed for scarce water, especially in times of drought. Like the Israelis, they tried to make peace, and sometimes they did, even intermarrying, but in a time of drought, and I discovered later that there were many, they fought. over scarce water. I discovered that the Israelis were actually known to some Larim men. During the First Civil War, some Larim had joined the Ananya freedom fighters of the south and had been trained in combat by the Israelis, who saw them as another small country being attacked by Arabs in the north. When I got back to, so I'm going to, if you'd like to hear it, I'm going to read a short extract from an unpublished memoir. When we got back to Napanait, Nakam is waiting with warm beer, the non-alcoholic variety, and I'm ready to eat. It's been a tiring day and I'm finding conflicting emotions hard. On the one hand, there's this wonderful land with bright and fascinating people living in harmony with their surroundings. And from my urban eyes, I can only see the pleasure of being in nature, the openness, the lovely villages, the hills, the huge vistas, the wide sky. On the other hand, there's evidence of hardship just being on the land, and evidence of male domination in its least delightful form, men's authority over behaviour towards women. I'm treated with full respect and dignity by all, but then I'm an honorary man. In my diary, I recorded the excitement of the day. Up at 6 a.m, Peter asks, would you like to see how my uncle pays dowry to his new wife? Of course I'd like to come, says the intrepid field worker. It's up the mountain in Duat clan, he says. We set out. A mile to Lochiloch, the uncle's compound, where the admirable lady we met yesterday turns out to be his first wife, Nardeng. She's topped out in a beautiful beaded goatskin skirt, which sweeps to the ground, slit up to the thigh at the side, and a beaded goatskin shawl draped over one shoulder and reaching the knees. Bells on chains hung on her arms and gave music while she danced, and beads in abundance on neck, wrists, waist and ankles. She's carrying a small dancing act in Yarawal, decorated with gold and silver strips, and a kid, that's a young goat. Her fine-boned best friend, also beautifully attired, now begins to sing in a fruity, throaty voice, praising the attributes of the senior wife. Look at her beauty, see her good body, good legs. She's a good house builder, from a good family. She wears good ornaments. The first wife's duty is to persuade the in-laws of the second new wife, to accept the offerings of goats and cows and allow marriage. The friend's song is to give her courage. So that's the bit of north terrain and the people. Well, that was in 1979. The next extract is from a blog I wrote for the Pitt Rivers Museum website and describes what happened in 1980 on my return. I grew up in Manchester where it rained a lot. We all complained about the weather. But when I lived amongst the Larim, I realised how lucky I had been. The Larim live in a so-called marginal climate with frequent droughts and famines, not knowing from one year to the next what nature has in store. The rains determine whether the cattle, the crops, and therefore many people will live or die. I arrived in January 1979 after a year of plentiful rain to be met by full granaries, fat cattle, and healthy people. Then the rains failed. By January 1980, there were empty granaries and thin cattle. Young and old Larim people were at risk of starvation and everyone was suffering. There was a cholera epidemic. The drought in 1980 developed into the famine which hit the whole of that area, including parts of Ethiopia, and which gave rise to Live Aid in 1983. Global warming will presumably make this marginal climate even more vulnerable as the years go by. So in 1980, I tried to record the effects of drought, like women collecting water from a riverbed 3 miles from the village and dug down 4 people deep. I tried to record the effects of food shortages and fighting the neighbouring group, the Toposa, the scarce resources. I tried to arrange for a Norwegian aid agency to bring grain to the people. I got used to running to the hills when we thought the Toposa were attacking with Kalashnikovs. Eventually, the Sudanese army also got involved. and I left southern Sudan after attacks by the Toposa on the villages and being seriously ill from hepatitis B. So I'll just give you a sneak preview of the Pitt Rivers Museum with all its wonderful, which is where I did work later, which I'll tell you in a while, and collecting music while I was there. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. What do I do? Just stop share. Here we go. That's good. In 2011, the new country South Sudan was established, and it was hoped that there would be a settled period, but it's not been so. The president is from the Dinka tribe or group, and his vice president is from the ethnic group, the Nuer. They were opponents during the last civil war and are now locked in a violent dispute relating to power, territory, and oil. All the oil is in the territories towards the northern border, and while the Dinka and Nuer make up less than 50% of the population, their influence over national politics have been major. And as their traditional enemies, rather like the Larim and Toposa, it makes it difficult to govern peacefully. And then there's been a civil war between the two groups since 2013, hundreds of thousands killed and dislocated, and the remaining 58% of the population neglected and affected. And again, virtually no development's being done. So I'm on to my career number 3, BBC producer director. On my return to the UK, it took a year to recover from various tropical ailments, and I was very troubled by the experience of living in an area of drought and food shortages, and the guilt of knowing I was able to leave while the Larim couldn't. I wrote articles for development journals about the situation, and then in 1983, another civil war between North Sudan and South Sudan broke out, and I never returned. So another chance phone call sent me to my 3rd career. My friends at the BBC noticed a job advert and suggested I apply. This was for a job at the BBC at their Open University department, so I did and was there for nearly 18 years. In those days, OU films came out between 5 and 7 in the evening and 7 and 9 in the morning, so they were quite well watched. I made more than 35, I can't remember how many documentaries, as well as directing radio and audio programs. One of my first films was about energy from waste, affectionately called Rubbish by Pattie Langton by my colleagues. The film was about burning household waste to create heat for the houses of Dusseldorf in Germany. The manager, this really had a strange moment for me in this place. The manager of the energy from waste plant had already indicated that he thought things were better under the Nazis. And now here I was standing in a vast incinerator interviewing him on the technology and history of Germany's manufacture of incinerators, presumably used by the Nazis. I'd been rather estranged from Judaism after my parents' divorce, and this experience certainly connected me back to my Jewish roots. I made film on Carmel College, a documentary which I called A World Within, with its enclosed culture and Jewish education. Philip Skelker was the headmaster, who was lovely to work with. I also made 3 films on the challenges of the disabled in Britain, including 2 with the wheelchair user Jane Campbell, a disabled activist with brittle bones. She's now a baroness in the Lords, a feisty, clever woman who's had 2 marriages in spite of her difficulties. Then after I felt a bit more confident in the craft of filmmaking, I began to make films closer to my heart on international development, social and environmental issues. For example, acid rain ruining forests in the northern border of the Czech Republic, or the effect of big corporations like Shell on the economy of the Philippines. And I was lucky to make 4 films in India, one A Vulnerable Life on poverty and village life in Uttar Pradesh, and another on Oxfam's work in Rajasthan, and part of a film on AIDS in Bombay and Pune. The AIDS film, A Future with AIDS, was filmed in 1993 in Zambia, India, and Brazil. This is L'Avenir avec le Sida, is a French version of what came out of it, because it was commissioned by the World Health Organization's global program on AIDS. In Geneva, and it was filmed in, I don't know if I said this, in India, Zambia, and Brazil. Well, in 1993, I didn't actually know if you could shake hands with an AIDS sufferer, so I learned a lot. In particular, that Zambian villages consist only of grandparents and grandchildren on the whole, and the parent generation had been decimated by AIDS. Where in the West we were discussing a gay plague, and indeed it was a terrible time for the gay community, in the developing world, unreported and unseen, AIDS was and still is playing havoc. At a party in London, I later discovered that the film was used by international charities to train their people on the front line. I'd taken the anthropological attitude that each country and culture should be treated as a separate entity. So I didn't intercut, like you see in a lot of films, you get the same thing in different places and they intercut it to show the similarities. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to show how best to target the people, particularly at risk in each culture. For example, India, giving condoms to truck drivers, prostitutes, and village women. There's some village women in India who came for their training. And street was used in street theatre for the general public. In Brazil, it was important to work with young male street prostitutes in the capital Rio and with street children. And in Zambia, which is a very Christian country, they didn't use condoms there. They didn't, and they decided that it would be better to educate children and villagers about the dangers of sex outside marriage through song and theatre. So in this picture, you can see loads of villagers sitting around in a semicircle, which is the way they always have their meetings. They do that in South Sudan too. So I'm going to do a bit of boasting here. I won 5 prizes, including 3 international ones. 1 prize for that AIDS film, and another for a closure of a children's ward in the NHS. It was a very painful documentary in the end to make, because 2 teenagers, a delightful brother and sister, died a little while after filming, and that was very devastating. And the nurses were very gung-ho about it, but I found it really upsetting. My other devastating experience was in Brazil for the AIDS film. I got close to some street children. I think you should be able to see them there. Who were living right in the centre of Rio in Candelaria Square. And at night they slept in the arches of a large building. You can see them there. And I also filmed them jumping in and out of the fountain, huddled up to sleep at night. Social workers were trying to help them with AIDS prevention. Even at 9 and 10, these little children were at risk. The government didn't like having street children in the city. They were regarded as vermin. And one night, with the nod of the authorities, a group of off-duty policemen went into Candelaria Square and shot most of the children dead. Street children normally congregated out of the centre of Rio, and no one noticed or complained if they were killed. But this time, it was in the centre of a tourist city. I was so overwhelmed. I wrote an article, offered it to The Guardian, which they printed, and I'm pleased to say it, can you see it? Yes. That it created international outrage. The article was called Shots in the Dark. I'm sure the killing still goes on. So that was not an easy time. I'll talk about my favourite film. My favourite film, A Time to Woo, WOO, Time to Woo, brought me my 5th prize. There it is, A Time to Woo. This time, it was in New York for the Margaret Mead Film Festival. I was seconded, there's the Margaret Mead Film Festival. I was seconded to BBC Bristol to make a film in their anthropology series, Under the Sun. This is still a time of the old-fashioned VHSs. So there's Under the Sun. And A Time to Woo was about marriage customs amongst the Ait Hadidou people, a Berber tribe living in the highest part of the highest mountains in Morocco, near Marrakesh. Every year, a huge market and fair is held during the autumn solstice near the Ait Hadidou, where they live. It's nicknamed Bride Fair. all through the summer months, the Untitled boys and girls flirt in the fields with, and actually, having said that, it's usually the girls who are doing the work. There's girls doing the work. I've got plenty of girls doing the work. There's another one of girls doing the work. Girls doing the work. But actually, it wasn't easy for the boys because the boys in Untitled had traditionally been the warriors, and there was nothing for them to do anymore. So most of them went to work in Marrakesh, and the few who were around were just sort of hanging about. They didn't really have a role. So the documentary follows the journey of two young people, one aged 14 and the other aged 27, looking for husbands at the fair, while people stocked up with grain and animals. And before the winter snow forces them to stay in their villages till spring, camels, sheep, lorries, huge bags of grain, clothing brought from far and wide, and merchants set up tents, enclosures and wide plain. Some older couples make their relationships public there and actually can marry, but not the younger ones. Divorce is allowed amongst the Untitled. I think it's getting late, isn't it? So a young bride might move to her she would move to her in-laws, and she might be used as a drudge by her parents-in-law, and she might run home, but any children that she might have had will have to stay with the husband, so it wasn't an easy decision. The divorced 27-year-old Fatima in the film had no children. She was looking for another husband. She prepared herself for the fair by taking an egg, which had stayed under her pillow overnight, to an aged egg reader who told her that she had a spell on her and to get rid of her unsuitable boyfriend. She was incredibly old. So Fatima bathed in a sacred waterfall, but it all failed, and she didn't get the man she liked. Younger girls can't marry at the bride fair. They have to have parental permission, and a formal wedding will follow. I went to one of their weddings. It was great fun, lots of dancing. For the 4 weeks that we were up there, we stayed in one-person tents up the mountain. No running water, no electricity. The loo was a bush higher up the mountain, and it was easy to be disturbed by a young shepherd with his flock coming over the mountain top. Showers were a bowl of water. When I got back to the Marrakesh hotel, I burst into tears at the sight of a shower. After 4 weeks of roughing it, my Jewish princess side came out in force. What I loved about doing filming was it's like a little family. You know, this was a little family in Zambia, and this is a little family well, it was a big family actually in India, because each piece of equipment came with at least 2 other people. So there were lots of people in this little family. This is in Rio, so people grouped together. And this one is South Africa, in the slums of South Africa. Things didn't last, and John Burt decided to close down our department, and things were changing. Technology was taking over. Technology, as you might have gathered from what just happened, is not my strong suit. So I decided to change career again. So career number 4, student counselling. It was 2002, and I got some advice from a marvellous organisation run out of the Jewish Blind and Disabled building in Colindale. Diane Moss, I can see is here, which is very nice, was working there as a volunteer and made my visits really enjoyable. They encouraged me to continue my training as a therapist. I'd begun before I left the BBC, and
I've just muted her.
What have you done?
I did mute her for some reason.
Pattie, you're muted, unfortunately. Could you unmute yourself, please?
where did you lose me?
About 2 minutes.
So did Diane Moss get her plug?
No.
No, okay, so it was 2002, and I got some advice from a marvellous organisation run out of the Jewish Blind and Disabled building in Colindale, where Diane Moss was working as a volunteer and made my visits really enjoyable. Thank you, Diane. they encouraged me to continue my training as a therapist, which I'd begun when I was at the BBC, and I ended up working, getting a placement through my lovely friend Judy Silver at the UCL student counselling service. It was a wonderful opportunity to work with young people at such a tender and difficult time of life. I stopped counselling when my husband Lawrence retired from the judiciary, and we began to travel for his work. So just a short postscript, voluntary work since then. In 2008, I was called out of the blue by Chris Morton, curator of photography at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. He wanted to know if I'd donate my photos from the South Sudan to the museum. And he offered me the opportunity to come to the museum to document the images, which gave me the chance to write up some of my research. And before the pandemic, I went twice a week to Oxford to research and curate my photos. And now the whole collection of 1,800 photos can be seen on the website of the Pitt Rivers Museum, as well as 9 blogs and my sound tapes of music and language. And recently I've been doing other people's South Sudan collections. I've finished my own. And then in 2012, I had another amazing experience of a chance meeting. I was with Lawrence, husband Lawrence, at his international law conference in Naples, and got chatting to a Swiss lawyer who turned out to have helped the South Sudan with its constitution. And he helped me to find Peter Longeling, because there was no way of getting in touch with South Sudan at that time. He's now an MP for his area. And I'm also in touch with some of his 21 children with 4 wives. I asked him why so many, and he said, so many were lost during the Civil War, we have to make up the numbers. And it made me think of the Jews after the Holocaust. Of course, we say that too. These days, I still watch film for BAFTA, and I've also got my fulfilling roles in the Jewish community, watching films with Gillian for the film festival. And I'm also a trustee of Jewish Renaissance, which is a wonderful magazine, which lots of you may have known. If you don't, I'm recommending it to you. It's a cultural magazine with lots of reviews of Jewish cultural activities. It goes all around the world looking at Jewish communities. It gives you a whole history of what's going on in Jewish life now, and it's beautifully produced. So that's my little plug at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pattie. Fascinating, really amazing life. Nothing like anything we've heard before. Amazing, very interesting. I'm sure there'll be loads of questions. Anybody can unmute themselves and ask one. I'd like to ask what your parents thought about your various careers.
Well, they thought I was a perpetual student while I was in Oxford. They were very concerned when I was in South Sudan. Need to mute yourself, Gloria. Yeah, they thought I was a bit mad when I was in South Sudan, but and then actually I was able to tell my father that I'd applied to the BBC when he was actually at the end of his life, and he was very pleased because he thought I was going for a real job at last. So yeah.
Well, what was communication like in the South Sudan? Could they speak to you on the phone?
Well, the first time I rang, it was unbelievably difficult, but we managed after many attempts to get through. They did have, because he was an MP, he did have a phone, but it was very difficult to, and over the years, it's got easier and easier. And actually now they have mobile phones and they do email. He doesn't, but his nephew who lives with him does. So in the capital, Juba, which is where he lives.
Lawrence?
Thank you very much, Pattie. That was wonderful. Tell me, are your films still available to watch? I mean, can you get them on YouTube? Or?
Yeah. They're all BBC films, and the BBC doesn't allow them just to be seen. So unfortunately not. I mean, I've got copies of half a dozen of them, which I took before I left the BBC. And I've got, for example, Time to Woo on a DVD, and I've got 1 or 2 of the other ones. But then you can't actually watch them, which is a shame, but there you are.
Thank you.
I can show it to anyone who's interested.
Well, maybe when when we get back to Shul, maybe we can have a presentation,
evening.
a little talk before.
Yeah,
About the
the
film.
time to is 50 minutes. Might be interesting.
Wonderful. There we are, another youngish event.
But you know, Pattie, you can have these things converted from the VHS format.
Yeah, no, I've
So-
converted them to DVD.
Ah, good, yes.
Yeah.
So are they not viewable because of copyright? Are they not viewable because
I can
the
show
form?
them. Yes, I can show them to a community, but I can't put them out, and they're not
Of
put out
course.
on BBC.
Of course. Okay, thank you.
Can I just say that what a pleasure it's been to hear about Pattie's life. I think apart from maybe Robin Ellison, I've known Pattie the longest from the days when her parents and they had to actually live in Manchester Town Hall when her father was Lord Mayor. There's these two girls swanning around looking absolutely gorgeous, the daughters. I remember my mother-in-law saying, they could have any boy in Manchester, those two girls. It really was. And of course, we've kept in touch intermittently, but she's filled in some of the gaps. And boy, Pattie, I didn't realize just how extensive your career was. It's been such a thrill. Thank you so much. And thanks really to my cousin Lawrence, who made sure that you sent me the link so I could listen today. Thank you very much. In fact, you've given a great idea. Maybe our show could do something like this. It's a wonderful way to get to know your members, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Gloria, did you have a question? Can you unmute yourself?
Just thank you again to my marvellous cousin Pattie.
I had a question. Pattie, how did you overcome the problem of language when communicating with the locals?
Yes. Well, in Sri Lanka, you know, obviously there are a lot of people spoke English because of the history, so I was able to talk to the English-speaking people. In South Sudan, I had the Peter Longeley translated for me, and actually he'd been educated in Uganda, and so he didn't really know the culture as much as he would like to have done. So he was fascinated, and I did quite a few tapes while I was there, audio tapes, and he translated them, but also he translated at the time as well, so he was an interpreter. When I went back, it was a little more difficult, but I had learned some of the language, and I'd started learning language, and I used people coming through who had English, so it was a kind of combination of all those things. But I was trying to learn language, often from the children, actually, because it was easier to catch it. If I'd been there longer, I would have got much better, but it became too difficult to live there, and eventually, after several months, I had to go.
Pattie, Edward, you were obviously out of your comfort zone coming from England to these regions. Did you ever feel any personal danger or intimidation?
The only time I felt personal danger really was in South Sudan, when we thought that because Amin in Uganda, you know, Idi Amin, there was a war going on, and a lot of his people were running up to the north with their Kalashnikovs. And because of that, the Larriman Toposa had got their way down to the border area, and they'd exchange cattle for Kalashnikovs. So whereas before, they literally only had spears, so that fighting was hand to hand, and that you would see the person that you were going to stick your spear in, which is a totally different thing from, you know, going tat-tat-tat-tat with a Kalashnikov. So they'd come back with Kalashnikovs. And so that made it much more dangerous to be in the area. So the fear, I mean, I've got a couple of photos of us running up the hills as where people to grab something, and then we all ran up, away with the, we thought that the Toposa were coming. Fortunately, it never did happen, but while I was there, but we had lots of scares. So, yeah. But other than that, I don't know. I think if you're open to people, they tend to be open back. I never really felt in danger anywhere else.
Pattie, can I ask you a question?
Ah,
Hi, Pattie.
wonderful.
Honestly, you're amazing. Now, just tell me something. I won't ask you what, but did you manage to eat properly while you were there? Because I saw
You're my Jewish brother. Well,
I would worry so much about you not eating. And did you join in? And did they bring you cups of tea in the morning before you got up? What
well,
was it you did?
actually, I probably ate better in all those places than ever, because at that time, you know, the European diet hadn't entered into it, and they had all their traditional foods. So in Sri Lanka, huge bowls of beautiful rice. The poor people, you know, I stayed in villages, you know, they'd have what they call a sambal, which was just a little bit of tasty stuff. But then they also would kill a chicken or whatever. In Sri Lanka, in Sudan, they had a delicious, what was translated as porridge, but it was really a really delicious meal of, see you in a moment, 3 delicious forms of food, which I can't remember any of them at the moment, which were made into a sort of stew, but were actually incredibly nutritious. And then there were ground nuts, and there were plenty of other things, you know, that were there which you could eat. So the diet was very balanced. And then we had meat, because they would kill a cow, kill a goat, and the women got the innards of the cattle, which was rather disgusting. But because I was an honorary man part of the time, I could get some of the meat from the outside, which was very nice. I'm sorry it wasn't kosher, Lindy, but what can I say? Although actually they did cut the, it was kosher. They
Baruch Hashem, Pattie.
Baruch Hashem, they took the net and let it out.
Yeah.
So there you
There
are.
you go.
Well, and that's why I said I didn't want to ask you what, but just did you eat? As long as you were well nourished, that's the main thing. Didn't go hungry.
Sorghum and millet.
Ah, millet. Yes, very healthy. Mm.
Pattie, can I say that, you know, there is always another side to the story. There's a professional story and there's a personal story. And the aspect that binds the two together in your case is this indomitable courage. And secondly, then, your just huge heart and your caring for others and the wish to help them. And we take both those lessons forward as we see them in your life as a human being today. And we are blessed to have you and Lawrence as very, very dear members. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
I could take one last question because we're running over time. Anybody want to put their hand up quickly? Josie Ann.
Pattie, that was absolutely fascinating. I mean, each career sort of stands on its own and would have been a story in itself. But having had so many careers, it sort of begs the question as to what next? Have you got unrequited ambitions? You know, are there sort of 2 or 3 careers still awaiting that you've already sort of mapped out? And we're going to get part 2 of this in sort of 5 years' time.
Well, I don't know. I think I'm a bit creaky now to go running around the world, but notwithstanding the pandemic. Well, I'm enjoying what I'm doing now. You know, I mean, it's for other people to do the running, and you know, I'm enjoying reading about them on. You know, we've got the Jewish Renaissance work, which I sub-edit as well. So I do that, and watching all these lovely films for BAFTA and for the Jewish Film Festival. I don't know. No, I think I'm settled. You know, I got married late, as you probably know, and I've been terribly lucky at this late stage of my life to find a wonderful man and to have love. And I guess, you know, it's a different phase and a different style. You know, my earlier life was very different in my personal life, but this is a joining, and I'm, you know, very happy. So I'm very, very content with all the things that I'm doing, which are gentler.
Pattie, I would like to thank you very much for a really fascinating morning. We've all enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Lindy, for your technical help.
Yes.
All the best to everyone.